After the 14th Amendment intended is to say that what matters is where you're born, not the legal status of your parents.
This was about slaves. Critics of people are pouring into our country under birthright citizenship, and it wasn't meant for that reason.
Was never meant to include people who are here unlawfully. The mere act of setting foot on American soil does not confer birthright citizenship to their children.
Beyond win for the Constitution, we know that this is something that has been enshrined into law for over a century now, and this is already something that's been adjudicated. And clearly what we're seeing here is President Donald Trump trying to upend the Constitution by executive fiat, and that simply isn't how you actually go about not only reshaping the Constitution, but also making law that will certainly upend many people who already see themselves as citizens in this country. So the fact that the Supreme Court actually ruled the way they did, I think is a huge win. But the fact that you did have at least 4 justices who actually sided with the president on this, but then in the actual ruling, a 6-3 ruling, I think it still speaks to how there is some movement on the court to actually address this issue, perhaps maybe further on down the line.
And I guess we should have segregation because Plessy versus Ferguson and Dred Scott decisions were 19th century decisions, as was what they were relying on, a case called Wong Kim Art.
Yeah, we'll talk about that.
Yeah, we'll talk about that in a moment. But here's the key, which is important to understand. It's really, to me, interesting that the same people on the left who attacked the Second Amendment and right to guns and so forth, that's not what they intended. Remember? They were never talking about handguns. They were never talking about guns. These same people reject the argument that, as your report indicated here earlier, this was about slavery. And certainly in 1868, we didn't have modern travel, and they didn't have immigration laws coming in the way that they exist today. So it was an opportunity for the court to simply look at this and say, this was never the intent. This was about slavery. To say, and then if I can quickly, on the 1898 case, the Kim case, the parents of the child were legal immigrants. President Trump's talking about illegal immigrants. When you say subject to the jurisdiction thereof, the primary allegiance of an illegal immigrant is not to the United States. There's no allegiance. And their minor children are subject to that same allegiance. So the argument...
The Supreme Court, they just issued a major ruling on birthright citizenship, and it could reshape the future of immigration in America. Here's what the Supreme Court have decided, what it means, and what happens next. Birthright citizenship comes from the 14th Amendment of the U.S. Constitution, which was ratified in 1868. It says, all persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States. For more than 150 years, this has been understood to mean that if you're born on U.S. soil, you're a U.S. citizen, no matter your parents' immigration status. The case and the ruling. The case challenged this long-standing interpretation. The Trump administration argued that the 14th Amendment doesn't apply to babies born in the U.S. to parents who are in the country illegally or temporarily. The Supreme Court, in a 6-3 decision, upheld a long-standing interpretation of the 14th Amendment. The court ruled that birthright citizenship still applies. If you are born in the United States and subject to its jurisdiction, you are a U.S. citizen. In short, the court did not change birthright citizenship. What the court says, the majority opinion emphasized the plain text of the 14th Amendment is clear. Overturning birthright citizenship would break with 150 years of legal precedent.
Difficulties that Donald Trump has with saying specific words are consistent with dysarthria and ataxia or apraxia. They can occur after stroke, they can occur with other brain disorders and dementia, and what happens specifically with the apraxia or ataxia are phonemic paraphasias. Phonemic paraphasias are when the motor speech required to coordinate words and syllables together are not coordinated appropriately. Example, if I wanted to say telephone but I accidentally said tefalone.
Only a constitutional amendment passed by Congress and ratified by the U.S. state could change that. The court acknowledged that the political debate, but it said it's not the role of the judiciary to rewrite the Constitution. Who this affects? The ruling impacts children born in the U.S. to undocumented immigrants, temporary visa holders like students or tourists who give birth in the U.S., the millions of families who rely on the promise of citizenship for their children. It also affects states and the federal government in how they handle immigration, benefit, and documentation. So what doesn't change? It's important to be clear. This ruling does not legalize anyone's immigration status. It does not change laws about deportation or visas. It simply affirms that US-born children are citizens from day one. So what's next? The political debate isn't over. Some lawmakers may push for a constitutional amendment to change the 14th Amendment, but that's a long and difficult process that requires overwhelming support. But for now, birthright citizenship remains the law of the land. The final thought. This ruling is a win for constitutional text, legal precedent, and millions of families. Love it or disagree with it, this is the Supreme Court's job to interpret the Constitution, not to rewrite it. What do you think about this ruling? Let me know in the comments. Like, share, and subscribe, and hit the bell so you don't miss more important update. Peace.
You may already heard by now that the Supreme Court ruled against Trump executive order regarding birthright citizenship. But Mike Johnson says, hold up now. An act of Congress could amend the Constitution. And it didn't only happen one time, but it happened 27 times.
Basically, you could say that's a textualist, originalist view. However, I do think that this has been grossly abused in recent years, okay? And that is the case that was being made by the plaintiffs in the case, and we're very sympathetic to that because it is a serious problem. We have it's become a birthing tourism, they call it, a trend where people will just come and you just come onto the soil and have your child, and then they're able to avail themselves of the welfare state and everything else. It's been abused. It's one of those things that was intended to serve a noble and important purpose and has been thwarted and overused and abused. And so I'm sure that we'll continue to look at that. I mean, I'm sure the conclusion from this opinion is going to be that you got to amend the Constitution to fix that. As we all know, it's a big challenge to amend the Constitution. It's only happened 27 times in our whole nation's history, and the reason is because you got to have 2/3 of both chambers of Congress and 3/4 of the states to ratify. It's usually at least a many years long process and very complicated. We'll see. I'm sure there's going to be lots of discussion about that. I will say I'm very disappointed in that outcome. I think it subjects the country to serious challenges going forward, and we'll have to deal with it as a Congress.
And Mike Johnson is legally correct. Congress must first propose the amendment. This requires a 2/3 supermajority vote in both the House of Representatives and the Senate. Yeah, I took notes. Even if Congress passes the amendment, it does not become law until 3/4 of all states, 38 out of 50, formally ratify it. The last amendment that, they were able to be successful on was the 27th Amendment, delaying congressional salary changes, was officially ratified in 1992, but it was actually first proposed by James Madison all the way back in 1789. So yeah, it seemed like they're just not going to take this laying down, that they have a response to this ruling. They're just brewing it up. Once again, Mike Johnson was legally correct, but they have other tools that they could utilize too. So let me know what y'all think about this response and the ruling from Mike Johnson and the Supreme Court. Drop it in the comments section.
It would be one thing if we didn't have any records from the people who actually wrote the amendments to the Constitution, but we do. So recently, the Supreme Court ruled that birthright citizenship is a thing, and regardless of whether you're a foreigner, whether you're here legally, none of that matters. If you have a kid here in the U.S., it's a citizen. However, as I said before, we actually have the writing from the person who wrote the 14th Amendment. And here's exactly what he said in regards to who the 14th Amendment would apply to. This will not, of course, include persons born in the United States who are foreigners, aliens who belong to the families of ambassadors, or foreign ministers accredited to the government of the United States. So when the Supreme Court makes this ruling, they are just outright ignoring what was written by the exact same guy who wrote the amendment.
We about to fact check this. First, if you mess with me, make sure you hit that follow button. And this month we're celebrating Pride Month and Men's Mental Health Awareness Month. Let's get it. What the hell is he talking about? First, how do you have the right answer in your face and still get it wrong? Because the quote you read was literally trying to extend birthright citizens to foreigners. And if you would have done your research, you would have known that that quote came from May 30th, 1866, when the Senate was actually debating on birthright citizenship. This quote is specifically saying that if you were born in America but your family are ambassadors or ministers from another country, you cannot become become a citizen here. But simple, how do you know that? I know this because other senators was against Howard because it extended birthright citizenship to other foreigners. One example is a Republican senator from Pennsylvania who literally said that Howard's amendment was going to cause an overpopulation of foreign people. I mean, he literally asked, would this allow foreigners' children born in the US to be citizens? They answered undoubtedly. So in other words, birthright citizenship was meant for everyone.
The Supreme Court just decided the birthright citizenship case, and almost no one is telling you this. The entire ruling turns on how the country treated Native Americans. I'm a Cherokee attorney. Let me explain what the court actually said. First, what the court decided, it ruled that children born in the United States to parents who are here unlawfully or temporarily are still citizens at birth under the 14th Amendment. The court rejected the executive order trying to change that. The key phrase in the Constitution is that citizens are those born here and, quote, subject to the jurisdiction thereof. The case came down to what that phrase means, and to define it, the court looked to the history of Native nations. Here's the history the court relied on. For centuries, it had been the rule that if you were born on a nation's soil, you were its citizen. That applied to almost everyone. In the United States, there were really only two exceptions: the children of foreign diplomats and Native Americans. And Native Americans were the exception for one reason. Tribes were their own sovereign nations. A person born into a tribe owed allegiance to the tribal nation, not to the United States. So under this reasoning, a Native American was not subject to the jurisdiction of the United States. Native Americans were excluded not because of their ancestry, but because their nations were sovereign. This is why birthright citizenship never automatically applied to Native Americans like it did to everyone else. It took a separate act of Congress, the Indian Citizenship Act of 1924, to finally make all Native Americans citizens of the United States. This history is exactly what the court cited in its ruling. This is what I want people to understand. Native American law is not a footnote in American law. It is often the framework the entire system was built on. The most consequential ruling on citizenship in a generation was decided on the history of tribal sovereignty. Save this. Follow for more on how Indian law shapes everything.
Here is Donald Trump's official response to the Supreme Court's ruling today regarding birthright citizenship. Now, before we read this, let's listen to how some people said this was a big defeat for Donald Trump.
Our US correspondent David Blevins is outside the Supreme Court, where they have upheld birthright citizenship. This is a blow for Donald Trump.
A big defeat for President Trump. This was a key policy in terms of his views on immigration.
Well, the Supreme Court has just handed down a second major decision this morning, this one on birthright citizenship, long considered a right in this country. Put simply, it means that if you were born here in the United States, you are a citizen of the United States. How did the court decide?
Emphatically rejecting the president's attempt with an executive order to redefine what it means to be a citizen in this country. The idea, the long-held belief that if you're born here on U.S. soil, you're a U.S. citizen. The opinion by Chief Justice John Roberts says that the Constitution, the 14th Amendment, the Citizenship Clause, makes very clear that if you're born here, that long-held understanding that you're a U.S. citizen.
And then even on Fox News, there was a little bit of a crash out.
This just broke, so I'll read it together and we'll digest it. The Supreme Court has ruled against President Trump's hope to eliminate birthright citizenship restrictions. It was a 5-4 decision. And they said it violated the 14th Amendment, guaranteeing automatic American citizenship for anyone born in the United States. So your reaction, because this directly affects you.
Yeah, I'm not going to get ahead of the president here, but I will say I adamantly disagree with the spirit of the 14th Amendment on what the Supreme Court ruled here. I'm not an attorney, definitely not a judge, but I disagree with the court's decision here. In my opinion, if you look at the historical reason the 14th Amendment was put in place, the way that it's being abused today wasn't the intention of the 14th Amendment. But like I said, I'm not going to get ahead of the president on this, but I adamantly disagree with the Supreme Court.
Now, finally, we get to read Donald Trump's response, and it's hilarious. The Supreme Court upheld birthright citizenship, which is too bad for our country, but we can easily make it up in Congress through legislation with the support of the president that has now been determined during this process. This is just his first reaction. I'm pretty sure he's going to go live and start crying and complaining about it, but it's so obvious this was the right call to make, considering the fact that Donald Trump himself and his family are a bunch of people who immigrated into the country.